I downloaded all the reviews for Hollow Knight Silksong exactly 1 month after launch, more than 260,000 in total. Let's begin with a quick look at the basics. Here's how those reviews were distributed over time. As expected, day 1 was the busiest, with over 40,000 reviews posted in just 24 hours. Zooming into the first 2 days, we see the peak around 4 to 5 hours after release, which might hint that many players were posting their thoughts before really spending much time in the game. So, how long did people actually play before writing their reviews? Most of them had only a few hours of playtime. Notice that the vertical axis increases by orders of magnitude, meaning those early bars are far denser than the later ones. When we zoom in, there's a clear spike around 3 hours played. Combining that with the previous graph, it makes sense. A lot of people downloaded the game right away, played a few hours, and then went back to Steam to leave their review. But not everyone stopped there. Quite a few players ended up with hundreds of hours, and a handful passed 600 hours of playtime. Here are the 10 reviewers with the most total hours. Even early on, some were already saying they can't stop playing, and yeah, I believe them. Keep in mind, at this point the game had been out for only 30 days, meaning they spent over 80% of the entire month playing Silksong. Absolutely insane. Now, how do people feel about the game relative to how much time they've played? This chart shows what we'll call sentiment, the ratio of positive reviews to total reviews, shown here in relation to playtime. Overall, players really like Silksong, but there are some interesting trends. During the first few hours, sentiment is very high. Then, across the next few dozen hours, it dips a bit. Maybe that's when early excitement starts to meet a few frustrations. But once players push past that phase, the curve rises again, and by the time they're deep into the game, sentiment is back near its initial levels. Those with hundreds of hours on record are almost universally positive. But now we are ready to dig a little deeper. I put together a scatterplot showing the frequency and sentiment of the most mentioned individual words across all reviews. For example, that large green dot in the top right corner, that's just the word game. It's the most mentioned word overall, and it appears mostly in positive reviews. Right next to it are hollow and knight. Naturally, the most frequent words aren't the most interesting ones, but a few other points stand out. At the top, we find all kinds of praise, the acronym for Game of the Year, consistently positive mentions of the price, and even words that seem random at first, like weight and worth, but are clearly related. We also see references to specific features, such as soundtrack and art, words tied to memes and humor, like Shaw, Hornet's iconic shout from the original Hollow Knight, and bugs, which could refer to technical issues, but more likely to the game's actual characters. We'll get back to those later. Some words refer to specific bosses, with different levels of positivity, and others compare Silksong to its predecessor. Interestingly, far more people describe it as an improvement. And of course, the juiciest part, clear clusters of complaints. Words like damage and currency lean negative, often tied to mechanical frustrations. This plot was the starting point for most of the analysis that follow. We'll revisit many of these patterns later on. But before that, there's something obvious we can do. Many of these words make more sense when combined. So what if we group them into pairs of consecutive words instead? Now the big dot on the top right is Hollow Knight. The one next to it is Team Cherry, the game's developers, and worth weight appears as a single point. I'm ignoring stop words here, so that's likely people saying worth the weight. By the way, whenever my plots refer to specific words, I'm working with English language reviews only. There are over 100,000 of those, so it's a solid representative sample of the global player base. Though there will be exceptions, but one thing at a time. With two word combinations, patterns get even clearer. We see best game, many bags, and get good, another meme linked to Hornet. But more importantly, pairs of related concepts start to stand out. Double damage and 2 damage point to the same frustration. Save points and long runbacks are about the pacing between deaths. Artificial difficulty and comparisons to Elden Ring hint at balance concerns. together with boss fights and flying enemies. Opinions are clearly polarized, from players calling it the best game ever to strong complaints about specific design choices. Let's take a closer look at some of the specific complaints. Based on a deeper exploration of the scatterplot, I grouped related words into broader concepts. For instance, damage, hits, health, and masks all fall under a single category I labeled damage. I considered singular and plural mentions and also accounted for spelling variations along the way. I then analyzed each theme from two perspectives. On the left, we have the negativity ratio, essentially the opposite of what we are calling sentiments, showing out of all the times a concept is mentioned, how often it appears in negative reviews. And on the right, we have the share of negative reviews that mention each topic. That is, from all the negative reviews, how many bring up that idea at all. It's worth noting that even reviews marked as positive can include criticism in the text. So even if a topic is discussed almost exclusively in a negative tone, that ratio won't necessarily reach 100%. The topic of rosaries, the game's currency, is usually seen in a negative light, but it's not among the biggest complaints. Players dislike the mechanic, sure, but those leaving negative reviews often have other priorities. The same goes for benches, the game's checkpoints, and for broader opinions about design. With difficulty and bosses, it's the opposite story. They still carry a clear negative tone, but they are also widely mentioned in positive reviews. However, a huge portion of negative reviews focus on these two issues. So they are not universally disliked, but when players do dislike the game, these are usually the main reasons. Finally, the damage-related keywords look bad either way. These refer mostly to enemies dealing 2 masks of damage in a single hit, a common frustration that shows up with both a high negativity ratio and a strong presence in negative reviews overall. I was curious about the issue with bosses. Is it one boss in particular? Do people love some and hate others? Here we can see the number of reviews and the sentiment for the most frequently mentioned bosses. Savage Beastfly is the most mentioned one. It appears in over 900 reviews, and it's received decently, although not great. The Last Judge, on the other hand, has a noticeably negative score and is mentioned in around 600 reviews, so maybe that's one of the encounters that needs attention. Players seem to really enjoy Belbeast, along with Disgraced Chef Lugoli and Garmond and Zaza, though these are mentioned less often. There are plenty of other interesting cases, both positive and negative. One that stood out to me was Shrine Guardian Seth. It isn't mentioned as much as I expected, considering the story behind it. This character is named after his designer, a 16-year-old fan who sadly passed away before the game's release. He met Tim Cherry in person and has a special mention in the game's credits. I searched for mentions of his last name in the reviews. There are only 18. Some highlight Tim Cherry's tribute, while others leave heartfelt messages wishing him peace. Rewinding a bit to our main scatterplot mapping word frequency and sentiment, I extended the same analysis to 3 word combinations. Here, the same key complaints appear again, but with more nuance. Now we can actually see those ideas spelled out in more detail. Damage taken, enemy design, lack of checkpoints and long runbacks, currency management, and so on. At the same time, we also see plenty of strongly positive points. People calling Silksong one of the best games ever made, or saying it's better than Hollow Knight, even acknowledging that it's harder. Interestingly, some of the most negative points come from comparisons to Hollow Knight itself. Phrases like "want to like/love the game." It's easy to imagine these sentences continuing with a quiet "but." Disappointment can be a very strong emotion. Moving on to 4-word combinations, and I promise this is the last of these scatterplots, we see the usual polarization, from people saying it's the best game they've ever played, to others strongly criticizing its difficulty. The detail that caught my eye is that several players suggest you should play Hollow Knight first, yet those who mention never having played the original tend to enjoy Silksong more than those who did. It's not exactly a rigorous scientific conclusion, the dots are quite close together, but still, it's a fun little contrast. Now that we are on the topic, how did Silksong affect the interest in the first Hollow Knight? Did people go back to play the original again, or even for the first time? I also downloaded all the reviews for Hollow Knight, just under 480,000, including every language. Here's how they distribute over the past 2 months, with Silksong's release right in the middle. We can clearly see a spike in volume around that date. The first jump matches the announcement of Silksong's release date, and review activity keeps climbing until launch. During that entire period, Hollow Knight was also 50% off, which likely helped, but even a month after Silksong's release, the original game is still getting far more attention than before. And if it wasn't already clear that these spikes align with Silksong events, here's how many of those reviews mention Silksong directly. So, Hollow Knight. That's where Hornet first appeared and delivered all her iconic lines. Let's see how those show up in Silksong's reviews. Over 5,000 reviews include the word "show". This is an iconic voice line, though she doesn't actually say it in Silksong. There's also a wild number of people saying "get good", almost 3,000 mentions. That's a reference to a memorable moment in Hollow Knight, where it sounds like she's telling us to get good at a very critical point in the game, even though Team Cherry later confirmed it's just a happy coincidence. It's funny to see how some players use it to mock those complaining that the game is too hard, while others jump in to defend themselves from the meme attacks. I also wanted to see what other fun things people were writing. Here are some of the reviews with the most funny votes. 3 out of the top 10 are about Steam crashing on release day. So many people tried to buy the game at once that even Steam and Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox stores couldn't handle it. And 4 of them joke about the double meaning of the word bug. By the way, here are the reviews with the most mentions of bug. I don't have much to add here. Now that we are looking at individual reviews, I also developed a small algorithm to detect ASCII art, a Steam review classic. Here's the most upvoted one, and here's number 2, which I think might also win for most copy-pasted. This is the 3rd most upvoted. You'll also spot plenty of this familiar face from the first Hollow Knight, and of course Shrek and, let's say, not safe for work content make their usual appearances. I've mostly been highlighting English reviews so far, so what's happening in other languages and regions? Here's how players feel about the game across the 5 languages with the most reviews. Russian sentiment is right around the global average, English is a bit higher, while Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese are way above it, both overwhelmingly positive. Chinese, on the other hand, sits far below the rest. If we expand this view to include every language with at least 1,000 reviews, we see a clear pattern. Both Spanish dialects and Brazilian Portuguese are near the top, while not only Chinese but also Japanese and Korean reviews trend much more negative. Let's dig a bit deeper, starting with the more positive side. Seeing Latin American Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese at the top made me wonder if that might be tied to price localization. So I built this chart showing 2 things. For each language, the share of reviews that mention their word for price, that's the line, and the chart is sorted by it from left to right, and the sentiment among those price-related reviews. And sure enough, the Latin American dialects of Portuguese and Spanish stand out. They talk about price more often, and they do so much more positively. Looks like price localization really paid off. Italian reviews are an interesting case. About 15% of them mention price, noticeably higher than most of the EU. But their sentiment is relatively lower. Maybe Team Cherry should take another look at how the game is priced in that region. Going back to sentiment by language, according to media coverage, not only did a Chinese translator break their NDA and share insider details on social media, but the negative feedback from Chinese players also came from what was described as a case of bafflingly bad translations. Team Cherry committed to fixing it. And they did. Here's the sentiment of Chinese reviews by day since launch. The first few days were noticeably worse than average, but over time, things improved dramatically. A month later, Chinese reviews looked just as great as the rest. Interestingly, Steam recently introduced a change. Review scores are now localized, meaning players only see sentiment from reviews in their own language. That update went live on August 18th, 12 years after the feature first launched, and just 2 weeks before Silksong's release. Were they preparing for the worst, making sure that a wave of bad reviews in one language couldn't tank this game's global score? Was Team Cherry waiting for that update to finally release Silksong? Did they suspect something, or were they just incredibly lucky? I'll let you draw your own conclusions. Alright, that's all I had. See you next time.